Very fortunate to have with us Mia López, who is the relatively new, yes,
Yes.
curator of LatinX Art at the McNay Gallery in San Antonio. And she is here to talk to us about, obviously, LatinX Art and to give us some insights about curating within that field. So, Mia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be sharing this important work that we're doing here at the McNay and really around the United States with an international audience. So I will just begin first by kind of situating the work that I'm doing within the context of, well, the site, and I'll kind of expand on that a little bit. So these are two different views of the McNay. On the left, this is actually a view of the historic home that was really the core of the museum for many years. The museum is 70 years old, and when it was first opened, it was actually the very first modern and contemporary art museum in all of Texas. And so what you see here on the left, that is the original mansion that Marion Kugler McNay lived in. And in her will, she wanted the museum or the home to become a museum and for her collection to really be the foundation of the entire museum. And then uh, almost 15 years ago, actually a little bit more than that, we opened an expanded modern wing that made our footprint significantly larger, provided additional facilities for an auditorium and some sculpture bays. So in addition to the gallery spaces we have an extensive campus with lots of outdoor sculpture. So I wanted, though, to zoom out even further because I realized that not everyone may know where San Antonio, where I'm zooming from, is. So, of course, here we are, San Antonio, in the heart of Texas, in the Southwest United States. But I wanted to actually go back even a little bit further. So this is a 19th century, early 19th century map of the Southwest region. And what you're seeing here, of course, no longer really includes those borders that we are so used to seeing when we look at this region of the world. And that's because, of course, they didn't exist. This terrain was largely Mexico and New Spain. And what I actually like about this map, if you were to zoom in closely, you would see the names of the indigenous groups that were in this area as well. And so I mention that just to say that, really 200 years ago, all of these national boundaries that have become so important to the way that kind of the political arena of the Southwest, those didn't exist. And people that now are called Latinx really existed throughout this entire region. We know now, of course, that both sides of the border, that there is this, cultural exchange. But for me, it's always important to kind of go back in history and to think about the way that, foundationally for particularly within Mexican and American culture, there's always been this shared terrain. So also just rooting it back to San Antonio specifically, San Antonio is a home of a very robust Mexican American community primarily, although we do have, other Latin American diasporic groups here, but we are a majority Latino city. And we are the seventh largest city in the United States. So some of you may be familiar with the Riverwalk and the Alamo. We have also an incredible public art scene. And so all of that kind of is the context that I am working within at the McNay. The position that I have was recently created I've been in my role for 7 months. And it's significant in that, again, this is a um, major art museum, medium size, however, with 22,000 objects in our collection. And we are serving a city and a community that is increasingly multicultural. So I'm curious about, how your class has been talking about terms like Latinx. One of the things that I have had to do really since entering this position was form a working definition for the institution and for myself. And I did that in, of course, collaboration with our leadership, but also really reflecting on um, the utility of this term, the fact that for some people it's a little bit polarizing, in the sense that when we're talking about identity politics, we're often talking about living people. We're talking about the identities of individuals of all ages. And what I have found in my work is that while a younger generation is more apt to embrace a term like Latinx. With some of the older generation, there's a little bit more of a conservative attitude. There was a resistance to some of the change that this term um, really indicates. And so we have had started to have some conversations as an institution at the McNay, with our audience, both in person and online. And I anticipate that that will continue. So for me, Latinx is an inclusive, gender neutral term for people that are from the Latin American diaspora that are living in the United States. So this is distinct from Latino in that, of course, we have that X instead of that O or the A. And that really has been, I think, for many people, what the point of contention is. What is gender neutral? And I think that it's also a really important forward-thinking way. By saying Latinx, we are aligning ourselves with, kind of the next generation of artists and thinkers. This is really, like Latino, an umbrella for many different identities. So, of course, this includes Mexican American or Chicano. It includes Puerto Ricans. It includes people that are from Brazil, people that are from Cuba, really anywhere, around Latin America. And I think that, again, something that we've really been emphasizing within the work that we're doing at the McNay, is the importance of seeing that Latinx art is American art. Latin American would be if that work was coming from those specific countries. But Latinx is really about the hybridity between the American context. So I thought that for kind of a starting off point for the conversation, that I would go to works from the McNay's collection that I have the privilege of working with. And something that I think is really fascinating about the way that our founder, Marian Kugler McNay, collected was that she was always thinking about both sides of the border. She had an extensive collection of art that was from Mexico, and also some religious works that had ties to Mexico as well. And so this is believed to be the first work that she collected, and it's kind of permanently on view in our galleries. And this is a piece called Delfina Flores by, of course, one of the most famous Mexican modernist, Diego Rivera. And what's depicted here is the child of his housekeeper, Delfina Flores. And he actually had a very close relationship with Delfina throughout her lifetime, so close that Diego actually became the godfather of her child later on in life. And so this is prominently on view in a gallery that we have many portraits. And what I love about that is that it's a conversation with everything from Picasso to Alice Neal, and again, is sort of situating this work within a broader dialogue. Something that is unique about the way that we present work at the McNay is that we do not necessarily do our galleries chronologically or kind of with themes like abstract expressionism or impressionism or things like that. We have a very eclectic way of displaying the work in our galleries that really transcends time and nationality. And so for the work that I'm doing, that's so key because I'm able to take both, great artists like Diego Rivera, but also more emerging artists and have them in dialogue. So one of the major components of what we consider to be our core Latinx art collection was a gift from two patrons, Doctors Harriet and Ricardo Romo. And Dr. Ricardo Romo was actually the president of a major university here in San Antonio for many years. And so he has a long connection to the arts, both locally, but even kind of more nationally. And so this is a piece by an important Chicana artist, Esther Hernandez, and it's called La Ofrenda. And it does a great job of, depicting an iconic Chicano art image, the Virgen de Guadalupe, but is a little bit subversive in that instead of kind of a more traditional depiction, we're seeing this as a tattoo on a woman's back, and the woman has kind of a mohawk, and it's a very feminist piece. It's very much embracing a kind of a again, in this time it was created in 1988. It would have been a very sort of contemporary 20th century woman. And so what I appreciate about this piece is the way that it takes some more traditional iconography and it puts a new twist on it. I also want to point out a major work that's from our outdoor sculpture area. And this is by Luis Jimenez. This piece, Man on Fire, is a bronze cast. And Luis was known for making work in both bronze and fiberglass, as well as many works on paper. And he really had an incredibly fluid way of depicting the human form, whether it was, in the drawings that he would make, or of course, most famously in many of the sculptures. And so this is a piece that, again, sort of blends that kind of more classical depiction of the human form, but then adds this, but because of the material and the fact, that this is, based off of a fiberglass work, there is a different kind of texture to the bronze. That's a good transition into this piece, which is a photo that has been hand colored. This is a San Antonio artist named Kathy Vargas, and we have several of Kathy's works in the collection. So Kathy is a Chicana artist, and many of the works that she's made have a kind of quiet introspection. There's a little bit of an alignment with craft, but not always. And she's often kind of thinking about the medium of photography and putting a very personal spin on that. One of the things that I think is really interesting to consider as I navigate the collection and continue to build a collection are the relationships that artists in the collection have to each other. And I think that particularly when we are working with living artists, it's important to try to consider many facets of their identity. And so going beyond ethnic identity, something that is important to note about Kathy is that she's a professor, and Kathy has taught many different artists and mentored them throughout their practices. So I'm excited to kind of think about that as a through line when I display her work, because we do have artists that she has mentored in our collection, but also as I think about building the collection and opportunities to kind of further strengthen those relationships. So this is another piece again from that significant gift that the museum received in 2013. And this piece is called Absolutely Chicana. And this is by a very famous muralist who's also done, many different types of paintings and works on paper. And her name is Judy Baca. Judy is based in the LA area, and that's where some of her more significant public work has been. And again, here we're seeing a depiction of a strong female figure. And this is a work that we have exhibited in several different contexts. And again, what I appreciate too about this is that there's a little bit of a throwback. This image, Absolutely Chicana, was made in 2008, but the way that the woman is sort of styled, it seems to be more of like a 50s or 60s representation. Many of the works from the Romo gift are works on paper, and that really speaks to a very long tradition within the Chicano art community of printmaking and screen printing in particular. This is a piece by an artist who was born and raised in San Antonio named Vincent Valdez. And Vincent is perhaps one of the biggest sort of success stories of the San Antonio art community. He left for college at the Rhode Island School of Design, which is one of the premier art schools in the United States. And he really developed his own signature style. I would say that probably what is a through line in all of his work from the last 30 years is a strong reverence for realism. And yet at the same time, he manages to combine these different elements, whether it's through color, different, details with the way that he depicts his figure, but it kind of gives them a more both a sort of surreal presence. So this image here is called The Strangest Fruit 9, and The Strangest Fruit is an allusion to a Billie Holiday song that's about the lynching of Black people in the American South. And this body of work that Vincent has made is about the lynchings of Mexican Americans in the Southwest, often at the hand of Texas Rangers. Vincent, as he has developed his practice, has become increasingly concerned with bringing stories to the forefront that have been erased in history, or perhaps lesser known. And the lynchings of Mexican Americans in the Southwest is one of those stories that people are less aware of. So what he has done in this body of work is he actually uses reference images of from the lynchings. Believe it or not, at that time, both throughout the South and the Southwest, people would create postcards and souvenir photos to commemorate the fact that they had attended these horrific events. It was a very dark chapter in American history. And so he has those reference images. And so what he was basing off of here in this painting was a photo of two brothers that were hung together. And so he actually had two brothers that he knew and was friends with pose for this painting. And of course, although they're very much living, their pose, the way that the light is created or used, really creates a haunting effect here. And I think another strength of this work is the fact that he depicts this on a really broad white background. So this is a piece that we currently have on view, and it's one of I think the most sort of challenging but important works in our collection. And this is from 2013. I should say too, in terms of thinking about the history of our collection, The McNay was the first museum that Vincent ever had an exhibition at when he had just finished his undergrad. So the museum has a very long standing relationship with him. And that exhibition was in maybe 1997 or 98. So it had been quite some time. We have many works by him in our collection. So I wanted to jump to some more recent acquisitions. And this work was actually acquired just in the last year. And Martine Gutierrez is a trans artist based in New York. I believe that she's Dominican American, but really, she and her body of work kind of represent a new way of thinking about identity that is incredibly fluid, at times sort of not quite erasable, but if anything, can be kind of both concealed and highlighted in different ways. And what she often does is insert herself into works in different capacities. And so this series, Anti-Icon Apocalypsis, she was representing herself as the central figure in many different representations of important women throughout history. So she has a version of herself as a Joan of Arc. And of course, here, what we're seeing is Maria or Mary. And so she's again sort of leaning into that imagery that we often see, the sort of shrouded Virgin Mary, and she's depicting herself in that way. And so one of the many things, that I mentioned that I love about our collection is that we are very eclectic in the way that we display things in the gallery, and that we do not necessarily stick to sort of convention. And so we have one gallery space that tends to depict more religious work. And so we have some what are called retablos, a type of Catholic religious iconography. We have some more contemporary renditions, of spirituality. And we actually, for many months this year, depicted or displayed this photograph as well. And I really loved that juxtaposition of having, this very contemporary image with some of the more historic religious items. And then we have this painting, Burden Narratives While Struck in Traffic in Pursuit of an Obligation at the Port of Entry by Fausto Fernandez. And this painting, we actually have in the context of kind of a more contemporary and modern abstraction gallery. And this, if you look kind of closely, it's almost like a magic eye, which was, I realized maybe a very dated reference, was really popular in like the 90s and 2000s, but kind of an optical illusion image. If you look closely, you can see that the pattern is actually a steady stream of cars that are in traffic. And what Fausto is depicting here, using abstraction, are cars attempting to cross the US-Mexico border. And there's kind of a universal language here, of that sort of being stuck in traffic, but at the same time, turning that into a pattern or motif, and then sort of having the viewer sort of think about the process of waiting, the passage of time, but also the mundaneness of everyday life, kind of whether it's going back, driving back and forth across the border, or navigating traffic in other ways. This was a very recent acquisition that we made just this past fall. And the way that it was acquired was actually by popular vote at an event that donors attended. There was a selection of artworks and they voted to acquire this one. And so that to me is really exciting to think of, that this represents what the patrons of the museum are interested in seeing. So in just 7 months, I've been able to kind of immerse myself into learning more deeply about the collection, but also starting to imagine how the works that we have, as well as new works that are being made by artists in the region and around the United States can kind of tell this bigger story around Latinx art. Last, I just wanted to point you to the McNay's current exhibition, which is called Upward Mobility. And something that I'm really excited about is that if you go to our website, there's a section with a digital guide, and you can use an app to actually navigate the exhibition with the De La Torre brothers, giving an audio tour and talking about different moments in the exhibition. So this is a great example of intersections of contemporary art and craft, and again, sort of expanding the idea of sort of a cultural clash, but and a hybrid sort of celebration of life on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. So I would love to open it up for any questions that anyone has. I know that was a lot of content, but hopefully that gave you a good insight into some of the work that we're doing at the McNay and the approach that I'm taking into this very rich topic.
Thank you, Mia, for the introduction. And I regret that when I was at the McNay, this particular exhibit was not up yet. So actually, can you go back to the image of, oh, sorry, you just split screen.
No, I will go back.
La Ofrenda, Esther Hernandez.
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, stop on this one for a second. This Jimenez one. Because it makes me think of Clemente Orozco and his murals Men on Fire, and I just wondered if there was actually a connection there between sculpture of Man on Fire with Orozco's paintings that are often murals of with a fire theme.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jimenez was very much influenced by, the big three and, the work that was happening, in and around Mexico. So that would have been a major point of reference for him. I think that that would, be an incredible pairing, to have, one day. Not something that we've been able to do previously, but I think, we were really fortunate that, we did, when the museum really first began, that there was this reverence for Mexican art, both the way that, some of that was entering the collection, but even the museum's first director was, really interested in looking south of the border and thinking about how Mexican art could be displayed on those grounds. And so something like this sculpture is a way to kind of continue that history for the institution.
Especially, are you familiar with Jose Clemente Orozco students? No, so he's one of the big three muralists from Mexico with Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros. And Orozco's paintings are primarily noted for having a lot of flame imagery in them. And actually, all three of them, I think, but I know that Orozco and Rivera were commissioned to do mural public artwork in the United States. So they were also trans-border artists. Some of it is in Detroit, for example. Some of it was commissioned and then destroyed for Rockefeller Center, and some of it is in like Pomona College, I think, in California. So it's not that those artworks that were public displays were just in Mexico. They were also public art displays in the United States. So I think that's interesting that this sculpture in particular, to me, had clear echoes, and I'm glad to know that I was actually right about that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I had another question though about the Esther Hernandez. Yeah, that one. So I love this, but I wonder, at least for me, it also looks like a wound. And I wonder about that and about the construction of feminism and femininity and the role of the Virgin of Guadalupe in these constructions of what it means to be a woman. And I just wonder if you had thoughts about that.
Yes. So I think that that is a very accurate reading and interpretation as well. I think that so there's many different things to consider here. So going back, okay, this piece is 26 years old now, and this is 26 or 36. Gosh, 36. No, 26. Sorry, math. So this is a work that when it was first created, if I'm recalling correctly, there would have been a little bit of controversy with a little some more traditional Mexican Catholics and the way that just the Virgen de Guadalupe to be displayed kind of casually in this sense. And while she's calling it an ofrenda or offering, there's also this sense of the translation into the tattoo. And so I don't want to dilute that in and of itself was a radical act for her to display this way, particularly on a woman who herself was displaying a little bit more kind of androgyny with her appearance. And we know, of course, that a tattoo of this size on the back would have been painful in and of itself to receive. But yes, that red tone in the center, also to in general, the aura of the Virgin Mary is often alluded to as some type of opening or vessel, often seen sometimes to have a corporal connotation with the vagina, or can be another kind of form of opening or vessel. And we see that throughout maternal imagery, even pre-colonial, going back to the Mesoamerican depictions of the goddesses and kind of Earth Mother. But specifically to that too, of the idea of the wound, there is an important Chicana theorist, Gloria Anzaldúa, who specifically wrote about the border as an open wound, or una herida abierta. And I have no doubt, 1,000,000% sure that Esther Hernandez would have read Gloria Anzaldúa, and I actually imagine they may have known each other when Gloria was still alive. And that concept, that the conflation of a religious image with pain is very much also speaks to, for many, particularly a certain generation of artists, there is a connection, I think, between the religious experience and a little bit of trauma.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned Anzaldúa because we're talking about her on Wednesday. So thank you.
Oh, great.
So, okay, I'm done with my questions. Questions from you all? Yes.
I have a question about how do you usually find and choose the artist that you want to work with, or the pieces that you want to display? What the process of finding and choosing looks like?
Thank you so much. I'm constantly reading and doing research. I have my eyes peeled all the time. One of the biggest ways now that I become aware of artists is through social media. And I say that because that's how I'm most frequently seeing what galleries and other museums and other curators are looking at. It has been for me a shift. So I've been working in the visual arts in some capacity since I was a freshman in college. So it's been almost 20 years, which is so terrifying to say. And I used to have to, spend even more time with like physical materials of, books and exhibition announcements, having to really hit the ground to go and see, check out a gallery space that I'd never heard of, or try to track things down. And that could be frustrating and not always the most fruitful, particularly given that, to this day, there's not really enough publications around Latinx art. And so social media has really made it possible for me to see so much more. Not, of course, yes, within my own backyard in San Antonio in Texas, but, nationally, to be able to see things that are happening all over the country and really even the world. That has been, a major way that I see things. And so what I often do is when I see something and I like it and I want to know more, then that's the jumping off point. Maybe I see an artist that I know post that they're in a group show. And I'm like, oh, let me check that out. And then I see the name, or work by an artist who I'm not familiar with, and they're in that. And so I will, go and check out their page, check out their website. If there's something that I'm working on and it happens to align, that's incredible, but that doesn't always happen. But what I will do is save images, bookmark things so that I can kind of revisit that. And I sort of have an ongoing roster of artists that I'm interested in and that I would like to, maybe feature in some way. Typically, we plan exhibitions at the McNay 2 to 3 years out. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less. There are many different scales of exhibitions, but we tend to do about a dozen a year, 2 of which are major banner exhibitions, which take up almost the entirety of kind of that new modern wing. But then we constantly are rotating through collection installations that feature a mix of artists. And so I have that always to kind of guide me in thinking about, okay, what are the different spaces that I have access to? In addition, I also do some projects outside of the museum. And so that gives me an opportunity to, particularly when I'm thinking about some more emerging artists, find playful ways to kind of use ideas that maybe wouldn't necessarily make sense at the McNay, but that I can do in a different space. And that's been, fun. It's a delicate balance because I have my hands full with what I'm trying to do at the McNay, but it's also nice to kind of have a little bit of flexibility in terms of thinking about different ways of showing and engaging, particularly with living artists.
Other questions for Mia?
Do you have like your favorite piece in McNay? I'm not saying it's there on the presentation, but just whatever.
That's such a good question. I think that it is. I think that I don't have one yet. I really do love, to me, the Delfina Flores. I've been spending a lot of time talking about over the last 7 months because I love the idea of it being sort of the first work. And there's something so simple and pure about this image. And I think the fact too that the person that painted it is such an icon of Mexican art, and for this to be the first piece that Mrs. McNay acquired and is kind of the beginning of it all. I think it's really it's a great, yeah, the symbolism is really interesting there. So I think I would say this right now, but I feel like that's going to change very soon, especially as I get to know more more work within the collection. So
So when we're talking about Diego, do you think his marriage to Frida might have like artistically kind of like did it impact him?
oh, I'm sure. I mean, I have
I mean,
multiple friends that
in,
are married
in
couple of artists, and absolutely their work is impacted by each other.
Yeah, I wanted to like change my question a little bit to like what ways, if you of course know it, maybe, or
Um,
just what do you think?
I mean, I wouldn't consider myself to be an expert in either of their practices, but I think that, you know, especially the way that he um renders, you know, the female form, I think would be impacted by the way that she depicted herself. Um, and I think you see something of an evolution with that in his work. Uh, and then I think I can't help but wonder if maybe there were actually at times active decisions that he made to make his work not appear as similar to hers. You know, whether it was, you know, with subject area or even just kind of the way of depicting a figure, kind of moving away from, especially kind of the way that she um, tended towards more complex compositions and symbolism, and the way that she would incorporate different elements, you know, around especially her own sort of self-portraits, you know, to kind of allude to facets of her own identity. I wonder if he sort of stayed away from some of that, and particularly also kind of depicting himself, um, as so as to avoid kind of comparison. And again, that's just my very speculative projection, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question about, is there any particular art you want to acquire for the gallery, or just wait and see what will be available?
So that's, I'll move to some recent acquisitions so yeah, we can see. Absolutely, I am starting to build my shopping list. It's challenging because I do not have my own dedicated budget for acquisitions. And yet, I have a lot of support from my colleagues in how we can think about building out the collection. So we'll see. I think that for me, what I've been trying to kind of do is to assess what we already have in the collection, and then identify what our strengths are and how we can kind of build off of that. So, for instance, you know, we have a robust collection of work on paper. And so it would make sense to kind of continue adding in that area. But then also, what are areas that are important that maybe we do not have as strong of representation in? So, one of the areas that I would love to see some more Latinx presence is actually our outdoor sculpture. And so that's something that I've been thinking through, and I'm currently pursuing a few different ideas around that.
Yeah, and also kind of a follow-up question, do you talk directly to the creators of the art, or just search the market for whatever you like to buy?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, if you talk directly to the creators of the art, or just see what's available at the market and then make a decision.
So it's kind of a little bit of both. I definitely think about, you know, the artist first. And you know, some artists have gallery representation, some don't. I mean, I would say by the time you're making, you know, an acquisition for a museum, typically an artist of that kind of level would have some gallery representation. However, I would say with Latinx art, that's not always the case because there's some incredibly talented people that just, for whatever reason, have not been getting gallery representation. And so it's a combination of, yes, identify an artist, and then depending on, whether they are still alive or where they are in their practice, then seeing what works, are available. I'm also, hoping that I can continue to kind of cultivate relationships with some donors that may want to either give works from their own collection or support the purchase of new works. And so with that, there's also a conversation then you have there, because you need to find something that makes sense for the museum's collection, but also aligns with what the donor's intentions are.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have any programs or initiatives at the museum currently that kind of support local artists or maybe in some way promote Latinx art?
We actually have several ongoing projects that are around local art. So we have a space at the museum called the Studio that typically showcases a regional artist and kind of has gets more into how they make work. That's an educational space. And then we have an ongoing project called Artist Looking at Art. That's a small, I'd say small because it's an interesting portion of one of our first galleries that the artist can kind of take over and install work within. And that's been a way for us to, specifically focus on some San Antonio artists. So those are ongoing. And then in terms of just, sort of the initiative, I mean, the creation of my position really was cementing that it's a constant in everything that we do, because we have a very small curatorial staff. We really only have about 4 full-time curators working with visual art. And so that really means that I have the opportunity to collaborate constantly, even on projects that don't necessarily seem to be explicitly around Latinx art. There's often ways that I can kind of bring into the conversation either an artist's name or a concept for that to kind of be part of the dialogue. So that's been really exciting to me.
Any other questions for Mia? So I don't remember, even though I was there, does San Antonio have a large public art scene with murals and so forth?
We do. San Antonio has a very robust public art scene, particularly around the west side of San Antonio, but also getting into kind of the downtown core more and more. And so there are significant presence of different murals around, both traditional murals, but also some tile murals. And then we have, because of the Riverwalk, as well as the San Pedro Creek, we have a lot of public space that is activated with different forms of public sculptures also.
Do you feel that impacts in terms of gentrification and pricing people out of neighborhoods once they've been turned into art?
I think it's a little bit complicated because so on the one hand, on the west side of San Antonio, that's a lot of the public art there was community and grassroots oriented and driven. And so that has not resulted in gentrification. If anything, it's been almost the opposite, of kind of being a way of affirming the community presence there. And then with a lot of the kind of more downtown, there wasn't as much of a residential area impacted. Now, I would say as it expands a little bit, yeah, it kind of depends on sort of the origin of that art, when it's coming from, you know, the artist communities themselves, when it's coming from, you know, smaller community organizations, then that doesn't seem to correlate with gentrification. But when it's being driven by, you know, sort of the more capitalist forces, whether it's, you know, the real estate or you know, just other businesses, yes, then it does seem to kind of be, you know, connected to that gentrification. But it's definitely complex. I wouldn't say that there's like a single, you know, formula for that.
Right. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question, actually, two questions. One is like, during those years that you hadn't worked in McNay, did you work in the North? Did you work with like the same area of art, or did you work in like more general way with art? And the second one is like, if you could say something, maybe, if not, that's okay, about like the screen print being like important part of the LatinX art.
Sorry.
Because you said that like screen printing, like the technique.
Yes. Okay. So I'll start with the part about me. So I'll try to give like a short synopsis of the way that I have worked. So when I started to study art history, I was really interested in contemporary art and Latino art. And what I saw, you know, right out the gate, I was in college in the early 2000s, but I saw that there really was an absence of that in the textbooks, in the museums, in galleries. And as much as I was passionate about that, I also recognized that I needed to kind of diversify my area of study. And so I kind of throughout my career would articulate that I had a specialization within Latinx art, but that I worked more in contemporary, or overall in contemporary. And so that allowed me to really build out a curatorial practice that included a lot of intersectionality. And so I worked with many different artists of color, queer artists, women and female identifying artists. And at the same time, I was able, you know, when appropriate, to kind of bring in that Latinx specialty. And I continue to really kind of think about the work that I'm most interested in that way. You know, I don't like the idea of being sort of in silos, but instead I like to think about things being in conversation. But the previous positions that I held were, generally more contemporary art focused curatorial positions within different museums. And so it was also a really good learning opportunity for me to kind of see those sort of larger mechanisms of the art world, and to at the same time understand how the field of Latinx art was kind of emerging. Although, you know, this art had existed, there really had to be it took longer because of structural racism, but it took longer for this to be sort of an accepted kind of part of the canon. And arguably it still hasn't become, you know, cemented as part of the canon of, you know, contemporary art, whatever that means. So it's been a little bit of kind of back and forth. And when this position was created, I was thrilled because I never really imagined that I would be able to do this work with this much dedication and focus. And so it's been cheesy to say, but it's been, you know, a dream come true. And then going back to screen printing, I think that there's many different reasons why printmaking has been popular across many different cultural practices. But I would say that I think that its connection to activist art is something that is important to understand. I think also the fact that for a more emerging collector, printmaking and prints are often more affordable. It allows the artist to kind of produce at a larger scale so that they could potentially sell more. And I think also the fact that there is the collaborative element, so often printmaking is done in spaces, because of the size of the equipment and all of that, there are ways that artists can work together, whether they're sharing equipment, sharing ideas. I think that that's a really important and appealing aspect of printmaking. And so many of the works actually that were part of the Romo gift were done at studios that nurtured different artists. Kind of would bring in a group of people and have them all work on prints together. And we see that, in a few different places around the United States.
Okay, well, thank you, Mia, for spending some time with us in an early morning for you. And give my regards to Matthew. And I really enjoyed this, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, everyone. Best of luck with the rest of your studies. Thank you for having me. Bye.
All right. I want to pause recording.